Good morning. Thank you, all of you, for coming to this press conference so that you can write about what we've just done in your newspapers. I, of course, am Amelia Earhart. Um, and you should know that although yesterday we flew across the Atlantic, I was actually just a passenger. I didn't actually fly at all yesterday, but that's only because I'm not trained to fly by instruments. I've been flying for a long time and I'm a very accomplished pilot, but I've not been trained to fly by instruments. And you might remember that it was raining yesterday. Do you remember that? It was raining all the way across the Atlantic Ocean. So for the entire 20 hours and 40 minutes, we couldn't see where we were because of that rain. And because of that, the other pilot, Wilmer Stoltz, who is much more accomplished than I am, who knows how to fly by instruments, he's the one who actually did the flying. But I did fly here yesterday, or this morning rather, from Buryport, Wales, where we landed yesterday. I'm the one who flew us here to Southampton, England, where we're having this press conference right now. So the first thing I want to do is tell you a little bit about when I was growing up, because people always ask me, when you were a child, were you terribly mechanical? Is that how you got interested in flying? Well, I suppose I was a little bit mechanical. I mean, how many of you like to invent things and build things and create things? I think every child does. And I remember when I was 6 years old, I decided that there was a chicken, our neighbor's chicken, kept getting into our yard, and I decided to try to trap it. And I created a trap using a box with a string, and it was propped up on a stick. And I waited until the chicken went underneath that box. I had put some food under for it. And as soon as the chicken was under that box, I pulled the string and the stick came out and I trapped the chicken. And I was so proud of myself for that. But you think my mother was proud of me for that? Not really, because I was sort of stealing the neighbor's chicken. So I was disappointed, but she made me return it. But that's the first time I remember actually making something when I was a child. What I do know is that as a child, it got on my nerves that girls were expected always to wear dresses. It's so hard to do anything athletic if you're wearing a skirt. And my mother was, my cousin rather, was friends with Amelia Bloomer. And she invented bloomers, sort of like trousers for girls. And so my sister and I, we wore our bloomers, and it was so much easier to run and jump and play. But we did feel something like outcasts because all of the other little girls fluttered around us in their skirts, and we just didn't feel that we fit in. But still, all I knew was that boys seemed to have more fun than girls. Boys were allowed to jump over fences. Boys were allowed to ride sleds on their bellies. We got a sled for Christmas one year, my sister Midge and I. We got a sled, and girls were expected then to sit on their sleds, to sit upright and push the steering thing with their feet, because that was more ladylike. But boys could run to the top of a hill, run and jump and slam their bellies onto the sleds and fly down the hill so much faster, and that seemed so much more fun to me that I decided I would try belly slamming. And my grandmother, we were living with my grandmother at the time, she was not happy with me at all about that. But I'll tell you, I think it saved my life once. Because once I was going down a hill so fast I couldn't stop, and down at the bottom of the hill, there was a milk wagon. A horse was pulling this milk wagon. And just as the milk wagon came around the bend, it was too late for me to stop. And I went right underneath the horse's belly. Now, that's because I was down on my belly on my sled. I was able to go underneath the horse. But if I'd been riding like a proper girl should ride back then, either my head or the horse's side would have suffered pretty badly when my head hit that horse. So I think belly slamming saved my life. And I just have always felt like girls should be able to do anything that boys should be able to do. And I've tried to do that. But I never imagined that I would become a pilot. That all started because, well, the Great War was on. It was probably 1918, I think, about 10 years ago. And I went to visit my sister. She was in college in Canada, and I went up to Toronto to visit her. And we were walking along one day along the sidewalk, and there came several soldiers, Canadian soldiers, towards us on crutches, and they were horribly wounded. And I thought, I haven't been doing anything to help at all with the war effort. So I got a job in the hospital there in Toronto. But whenever we had any free time, my sister Pidge and I, we would go and go out to the airfield. There were a lot of the men from the Air Force, the Canadian Air Force, who had airplanes nearby. So we would go out to the airfield and we would watch them as they were flying. And I think the first time I realized I might want to fly was the first time I went out to that airfield. The propellers started spinning and the snow on the ground kicked up into our faces, and the spray of that snow, that icy snow, just was so exciting to me. So several years later, my family had moved out to California and we were living in Los Angeles. And at Christmas, my father said he would take me to an air show. Well, as soon as I saw those planes go up into the air, I knew that if I didn't fly, I would die. So I told my father that I wanted to take lessons. Would he ask how much lessons cost? Because I didn't think they would take a girl seriously. So my father asked, and he found out, and it was so much more money than we had. But I knew I had to learn how to fly. So even though we didn't have enough money to do it, you know what I did? I got a job. I got a job at the telephone company, working in the mailroom. And then I got a job driving a gravel truck, all to make enough money to be able to take the lessons. And my first teacher was Netta Snook, because again, I didn't want to make a lot of mistakes in front of the guys. So I asked for a woman to be my teacher. And Netta was a great teacher, but eventually she got married and her husband didn't want her flying anymore. So I had to find a new teacher. I cut my hair off. I bought myself this leather jacket. I rubbed oil all over it so it would look really used. I slept in it to break it in so that people would take me seriously. And I spent every minute I could studying. How do planes work? How do their engines work? What are the physics? What is the air like? How does it all happen? And then I began breaking records. The first plane I bought from a man named Bert Kinner. It was a little yellow Airster. The Kinner Airster, I called it my canary. I loved that little plane. And she's the first one that I broke any records in. We were flying at an air show one day there in Long Beach, California, and I decided that I would see just how high I could go in that airplane. And I took her all the way up to 14,000 feet before she stalled. And when she stalled, I began spiraling down. But I was ready for that, because one of the things I had made the pilots teach me was how to do stunts, how to do loops and barrel rolls and slides, so that if I was ever in a dangerous situation, I would know how to get out of them. So what I did then was when I was at 14,000 feet and I began spiraling down, I decided I would wait until I was almost to the ground before I pulled up, before the fog broke, because it was very foggy. Well, the fog broke at 3,000 feet and I leveled off, and I thought I was very smart. And then one of the old men at the airfield said, "That was very dumb of you. What if the fog had not let up? You could have crashed right into the ground." And he was right. It made me realize I could do some stunts and some hot dogging, but I'd better be careful, because what I was doing was dangerous. Well, eventually I had to sell my little canary because my mother decided to move back east and she wanted me to go with her. So I sold the canary and I bought myself a bright yellow Kissel car, Kissel Roadster, and I called it the Yellow Peril. And we drove all the way across country, and we stopped at all the national parks along the way. And then I got to Boston and I got a job with children. I got a job working at Dennison House, which is a They call it a settlement house. It's a place where immigrants from China, from Syria, they come and bring their children so that their children can learn English and learn about American culture. So I was a teacher, and I loved that. That's what I want to do for the rest of my life. But I also was working at Denison Airport, different Denison, same name. I had an airplane there that I could use whenever I wanted to, and the people who were pilots there got to know me. And I guess that's how I ended up making the flight on the Friendship yesterday. Because one day I was there playing with the children, having a wonderful time, and someone said to me, "There's a phone call. It sounds very important. You'd better come and take it." And when I answered the phone, there was a man named Captain Rayleigh, and he asked if I was Amelia Earhart, the pilot. I said, "Yes." He said, "Would you like to go on a great adventure?" And I said, "That depends. What is it going to be?" Well, he said, "Well, come to a meeting tomorrow in New York." I actually had to get on a train and go all the way to New York for this meeting. And when I got there, I discovered that they wanted me to be the first woman to cross the Atlantic by air. Well, you know what my first thought was? That's dangerous. Do you know 14 people have died in the last year trying to cross the Atlantic by air? So my first thought was, that's dangerous. But you know what my second thought was? Of course I want to do that. If you're offered an opportunity like that, why wouldn't you do it? So they needed to find a woman who could go on this trip because there was a woman who, her name is Mrs. Frederick Guest. She was Amy Phipps. She was born in America, but she married an Englishman. She bought herself an airplane and she wanted to be the first woman to cross the Atlantic, but her family said, "No, it's too dangerous. You can't go." So she wanted a replacement, and that's why Captain Rayleigh called me. They told me I would be the captain of the flight. I'd be in charge of everything, even though I actually couldn't fly it if the weather was bad, as it turned out. And I have a picture here of the plane. This is the Friendship. Now, you've all heard of Admiral Byrd, right? The man who explored the North Pole. This was his plane. And Mrs. Guest had bought the plane, but everyone thought that it still belonged to Admiral Byrd. And they had it in a hangar at the airport there in Boston, and they were trying to get it ready to go all the way across the Atlantic. They put the windows in the sides that you can see. And you see how this plane has wheels like most planes? Well, the problem was we were going to take off from water and land on water, and wheels weren't going to work. So they had to take off the wheels and put on something called pontoons. Pontoons are, they're sort of like skis instead of the wheels. And all of that was done in secret, and everyone who knew that the plane was in the hangar being worked on, they thought it was because Admiral Byrd was going to Antarctica and he was getting the plane ready to go to Antarctica. They didn't know that it was getting ready for a woman to create a world record. But I couldn't go anywhere near it because if anyone saw me going near it, then they might figure out what was happening. So I didn't see the Friendship until the day we first tried to take off. And I say try because it was not easy to do. I have another picture for you. There are the pontoons. All right, can you see the little ski things there? And they've sort of disappeared along the bottom. They're actually almost as long as the plane is. You can't really see that. But when we first tried taking off, the problem is that the pontoons, the water was too slick. There wasn't enough wind, there wasn't enough chop. And so the bottom of the pontoons and the top of the water created sort of a vacuum. It was hard for the plane to be able to take off because there was suction between the water and the bottom of the pontoons. So the first morning we tried, and we could not get off the water. And we tried again the second morning. The third morning in a row, we got up at 3 o'clock, made our way all the way out to the airport, got on board, and finally, after throwing out most of our extra gas cans, and after getting one of the pilots to leave, so there were only 3 of us, we were finally light enough when we all went to the back. we were light enough that we were able to take off from Boston. And we flew from Boston up to Canada. We stopped in Halifax, Nova Scotia. And then from there, we flew up to Trepassey, Newfoundland. And we thought that we would take off the next morning to cross the Atlantic. We were sort of in a race by this time because there were several other people, other women who were trying to do the same thing. Thea Reisch, for example, who's German, she was trying to break the record and fly across the Atlantic first. And so we were in a hurry, but we didn't want anyone to know what we were doing because if someone was planning to do the same thing, we didn't want them to rush on our account because they were trying to beat us if they weren't ready to go. So we waited in Trepassey in Newfoundland for 2 weeks because the weather was so bad. The water was too choppy, it was too windy, and we couldn't take off. For 2 weeks, we did nothing but play solitaire and sit around and talk and eat canned rabbit. Canned rabbit's awful. But finally, after 2 weeks, the weather was clear enough one day that I said, this is it. We've got to go. We've got to go. And I ran and I woke up Captain Stoltz, who was the pilot, and I woke up Slim Gordon, who was the navigator, and we ran down and got into that plane and decided to try to take off. And it took us a couple of tries because the water was still a little slick, but we had just enough wind in our nose that helped the plane lift up off the water. Well, that's when it got dangerous. Because just as we lifted off, I don't know what happened, but suddenly the plane lurched to one side. Well, it lurched toward the side that had the door, and the door flew open. Well, that door the latch had broken, and Slim Gordon, he had tied it off to a gas can so that it would stay closed. But when the plane lurched to the side, that gas can started to slide down towards that open door. And if that gas can fell out, tied to the door like it was, it would have jerked the plane, hit the water, we would have crashed. So I jumped on top of the gas can, and now I was sliding towards the door too. And so Slim Gordon, he jumped on top of me and he pulled me back, and the plane leveled itself. Oh, and we managed to get that door closed, and we tied it off to another part of the plane so that it wouldn't slide open again. That's how it started. And then for the next 20 hours and 40 minutes, we flew. We had to go up to about 10,000 feet because, like I said, it was stormy and the clouds were so thick, we couldn't fly below them. Obviously, we couldn't fly through them. So up at 10,000 feet, we were up so high you could actually see the sun almost never went down. It was only dark for about 4 hours, and even then not completely dark. We watched the sun set on one side and the sun rise on the next. And the colors were beautiful. I know you've probably never been above the clouds before. Most people never have, but they look so solid. It looks like you could jump out of the plane and bounce on the clouds. And the light played purples and oranges and blues. It was beautiful. And the cloud shapes, there were dolphins and teddy bears and whales and anvils. And I just sat at the window gulping in the beauty and taking notes because that was my job. I was supposed to take notes to write a book, which I'll do. Finally, we knew that our gas was running low. And we knew that by now we ought to be getting near Southampton, England. We were flying east-west. And so when we came down below the clouds and looked for the shipping traffic, it should have been going east-west along with us. It should have been going through that English Channel between England and France, and that's east-west. We saw a ship, but it was going north-south. And then we thought, oh no, where are we? What's happened? Because if the ships are going north and south, then we're not at all where we think we are. And we didn't know what to do about it. So Captain Stoltz said, let's circle around that ship. Maybe we can get them to write their latitude and longitude on the deck of the ship so that we'll know where we are. So we circled around the ship, and I took an orange. I wrote a note saying, please paint coordinates on deck And I put that note in a bag with some oranges to weight it down. And as we went around and around that ship, I waited and waited until just at the right moment, I thought I dropped that bag, but it missed the ship. So we went around one more time. I wrote another note, some more oranges in a bag, and we went around one more time, and I dropped that bag, and I missed. The wind, the speed, it was hard to judge. And we decided there wasn't enough gas to waste to try a third time. So we kept going. We just had to trust that the instruments that Captain Stoltz had been using were correct. And then ahead of us, finally, we saw land. We didn't even know it was land at first. We thought it might have been clouds, but it was land. And then we began to see little fishing boats, and we didn't care where we were, just that we could make it down safely. So we glided into the harbor, and someone took this picture as we came in. This was yesterday. This was in Wales, Buryport, Wales, as we came in. Well, the funny thing is, no one even seemed to notice. We glided to a stop finally. The engine was sputtering by that time. We tied ourselves off to a buoy, and Slim Gordon climbed out onto one of the pontoons, and he began waving to try to get help for us. And the people in the fishing boats, they just waved back. And then he waved some more, and they waved back. And then I climbed out with a handkerchief, and I began to wave the handkerchief, and there was some fellas that were up on the bank. They were working on a railroad bed up there, and one of them took off his shirt and he waved it around to say hello. No one seemed to understand that we were trying to get their attention because we needed their help. It took an hour. Finally, after an hour, one of those fishing boats came up, and my goodness, when they discovered who we were, the scene changed entirely. We got onto land, and I have another picture to show you. Someone took this picture. See that crowd that greeted us as soon as word got out what we were? Now there you can clearly see the pontoons instead of the wheels there. There was such a crush of people when we finally got ashore, we could hardly move. The police had to move everybody back just so that we could walk through. I had a handkerchief, as I said, the one that I had waved, it was in my hand when I got off the plane, and then it was gone. I think someone must have taken it as a souvenir. And we finally got a decent night's sleep. And this morning then, I flew here. So although I didn't I didn't fly crossing the Atlantic, I did fly the Friendship this morning from Wales here to England. But I think the next thing I'd better do is learn how to fly by instrument so that as I start breaking records, I can break them more honestly. There's someone who's joked already and said I was only baggage on that flight. And I suppose that's true in a way. But nonetheless, I am the first woman to ever have crossed the Atlantic by air. So baggage or not, I'll take that. But the real honor goes to Captain Stoltz and Captain Gordon, who did the flying, and to Mrs. Frederick Guest, whose airplane the Friendship is, because without her, this never could have happened at all. So now, as I said, you are reporters, you have newspapers, and I know that your fans are going to want to know all about my flight and my life. So what questions do you have for me that I can answer for you?
Oh.
Mary Beth?
Oh, hold on, Mary Beth. Hold on. Well, I'm trying to unmute you, but I'll just unmute everybody. Okay, Mary Beth, you can go now.
Did you only eat canned rabbit when you went on the thing?
Well, there was more than just canned rabbit in the 2 weeks, but it seems like the people of Newfoundland eat canned rabbit at almost every meal. So there was a lot of it. There was fish. we were on the sea, so there was some fresh fish, and they had some lamb. So there were some other things too, but it seemed that every other meal was canned rabbit, and I'd never had it before, and I'll tell you, I never want to have it again. Something else that struck us that was very strange there in Newfoundland was everyone seemed to wear red. I don't know why that is, but red skirts and red sweaters and red scarves on their heads, and red is definitely their favorite color in Newfoundland. So it was interesting how different they were. They were very kind people, but it was a small enough place. It was boring. I'll admit that. What else do you want to know?
Liberty, did you have a question? I thought I saw her.
I have my notebook and I have a pencil right now.
Awesome. Did you write down any questions?
No.
Okay.
Molly Ann, you have a question?
Why'd you take the job to fly over the Atlantic Ocean?
For the fun of it. For the fun of it. You know, how often in someone's life do you get the opportunity to be the first to do anything, the first person ever to do it? And like I say, it was dangerous. 14 people in the last year have died, 3 of them women, trying to be the first. So it was dangerous, but when you're offered a chance like that, you don't say no. That's all there is to it. You take the chance.
I have a question.
Yes.
Amelia, did you sleep in any of the 20 hours that you were flying over the Atlantic? Did you sleep at all?
Oh, I dozed off for about an hour, but that's all. It was too beautiful. I couldn't bear to close my eyes. It was just, I didn't want the experience to end. I wanted to live every second of that experience. And so sleep did overcome me for a short time, but I then forced myself to wake back up because I didn't want to miss a minute of it. So you can imagine how tired we all were when we finally got there to Wales. We were exhausted. Do you have any other questions? Do you want to know any more about my childhood? Do your readers want to know about my childhood?
Where were you born?
Well, I was born in Kansas City.
Oh.
My parents, though, my father worked for the railroads. He was a lawyer for the railroads, and he traveled all the time. And my mother traveled with him. So during the school year, my sister Pidge and I would stay with my grandparents in Atchison, Kansas. And so we would be in Atchison during the school year, and we would spend the summer in Kansas City. And that's where we were for the first 12 years or so. But then my father got another job with the railroad somewhere else, and we moved. And from that point forward, we moved constantly. I went to 6 different high schools in 4 years. So I think that's one of the reasons, though, that new places and new adventures, they don't bother me, because we moved around so much from the time I was 12 until I finally moved out on my own, that I came to realize every place has its own beauty, and there are interesting people everywhere you go. And if you look at it that way, life is just an adventure. It's one adventure after another. Molly Ann.
Hold on, let me unmute her. Okay. Yeah.
When did you find out your father had cancer?
I don't think my father does have cancer. He hasn't told me if he does. Maybe I need to write him a letter and find out. Have you any other questions? Well, then, if you'll wait right here, I have someone else that I'd like you to meet. Don't go anywhere. Hello.
You have
I'm Darcy, and I'm back.
oh, I think
So-
Carter, are you raising your hand? Do you have a question, Carter? Well, maybe not.
No. Okay. So, Molly Ann, the reason I answered your question that way was that her father, at the time that she flew across the Atlantic, her father was still very healthy. So she didn't yet know that he was going to get sick. So I was in 1928 just now, and I could only talk about things that had happened up until 1928. So if you had asked me, Amelia Earhart, what happened to you when you disappeared? I couldn't answer that either, right? Because she hadn't disappeared yet. So she doesn't know. So that's one of the funny things when you portray someone from history, you have to pick a certain time, but then you can only talk about whatever has happened up until that time. She had a hard time though. I mean, one of the reasons that they moved so much was her dad drank a lot and he kept losing his jobs because of that. And it made their home life really hard. And eventually her parents divorced, and she stayed on good terms with both of her parents, and both of her parents helped her with her flying. But it always makes me think, it doesn't, having a hard situation when you're growing up doesn't have to mean that you can't do great things with your life. For her to come from a situation where, can you imagine that? 6 different high schools in 4 years? How disruptive that would be. But she made a choice not to let it get in her way. She made a choice that she was going to be a success despite the troubles with her parents, and despite the fact that they kept moving. She was going to do great things with her life, and she did. So, what do you want to know? The pictures that I showed you belong to the Smithsonian, which is a museum in Washington, D.C. It's like the National Museum, and they've got all kinds of pictures. And there also were a couple of them from the San Diego Historical Society. There are gobs of photographs of Amelia Earhart and her planes and the people she flew with online. So it's fun to just go on, do a Google search of Amelia Earhart and her airplanes, and you'll see what people looked like and how they dressed. Let me ask you guys this. Was life in black and white back then? No. Sometimes when you see these photographs, it's hard to imagine, what things looked like in color. But they were in color. That should be a blue sky. That should be an orange airplane with yellow wings. It actually looked more like this, right?
Oh.
And the people were in color too. It's just that film at that point was not yet in color. So it makes it seem like the whole world was in black and white, but it really wasn't. It was in color, just like our world is today.
Are any of your planes, the Canary or any of the ones that you owned, in any museums anywhere? Like, can people see those planes right now?
Yes. The Friendship ended up in a museum in New York, which I don't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but you can Google that. Where is Amelia Earhart's Friendship plane? And it's in a museum in New York. Her Lockheed Vega, which was one of her favorite planes, is at the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum. So, and there may be others. I don't know if there are any others of hers, but I know that those two are in museums now. Yeah.
I know that the kids know about the coming across the Atlantic, but what are some of the other records that she held?
Well, she set a record for speed for a cross country, across the United States. She was attempting to be the first woman to fly all the way around the world when she disappeared. It's a funny thing because I'm doing 1928. I know that she broke a bunch of other records, but I haven't studied much that happened after 28. Yeah, so there's a whole list of records that she broke. And I think one of the things that was really wise was, remember when she said that she learned how to do stunts so that if she was ever in a dangerous situation, she'd know how to recover from it. And I think several times that that probably saved her life, because early flying, the planes were not reliable. The engines would cut out. It was really dangerous. And so she was smart to think about it that way. Okay, Ladybug's phone.
I know, and I'm trying to unmute her and it's not letting me.
Liberty.
Liberty, can you unmute yourself? Try to unmute yourself.
There you go.
There you go.
There.
How long did it take her to cross the Atlantic?
20 hours and 40 minutes. So it was almost a 24-hour period. And there are some really good books there are some that are great kid books. Who was Amelia Earhart is a good one. Amelia Earhart, Young Aviator.
Mama,
And then this one I really like, Lost Star. It's also really good. But she wrote 2 books herself, one of them so that we would remember how long it was. Oh, hang on. Let me turn off the background. 20 hours, 40 minutes is called that because that's how long it took to fly across the Atlantic. And she tells the whole story about how she was chosen and how she was at work that day as a social worker playing with the kids when the phone rang, and about looking out the window and gulping in the beauty of the clouds and the light on them, and about getting her handkerchief stolen when they arrived in Rabbit. That's all in this book that she wrote. She also wrote, Molly Ann, do you remember how I answered your question? Why did she do it? For the fun of it. She wrote in a letter to her mother, I think it was, before she took off, that she was doing it for the fun of it. And this book is all about aviation and physics and how the air moves in waves, like the waves on the ocean, and about how you don't feel like you're really high up because the landscape just flattens out below you, so you don't have the sensation of being super high like if you were standing on a cliff. And she's a really good writer, a very funny, really good writer. So I'd look for those. What other questions do you have? Nobody's asked the really obvious one. What happened to Amelia Earhart? What happened?
Oh,
what happened to her?
Nobody knows.
yeah.
Anyone have any ideas? Aiden's got his hand up.
Oh, here, hold on. Let me unmute him. Sorry. Aiden, try and unmute. There you go. I got
I got it. Okay, so I think they still can't find her till today, but I think she crashed when she was flying somewhere. I think she was flying. I think she crash landed, but they're still finding her plane and her.
Yeah. So do you want, okay, Molly Ann, what do you got?
She disappeared.
She did. She did. She had almost made it all the way around the world. She was flying to an island called Howland Island. The next day she was going to fly to Hawaii. And the next day she was going to fly to San Francisco, and then the trip would be over. So she was almost home, but she never made it to Howland Island. And they don't know exactly why. The instruments that she had on board the plane weren't all working quite right. But her navigator, Fred Noonan, did know how to navigate, by what's called dead reckoning, where you're using points on the landscape. So they still should have been able to make it to Howland, but for whatever reason, they never showed up. There are some people who believe that she crashed in the Atlantic. I don't believe that. What I think happened, what there's a lot of evidence for, is that they landed on an island called Nikumaroro, which is also called Gardner Island. It's a teeny, teeny little speck of an island that you cannot even see sometimes if you're looking for it from the air. Tiny little island. They think that she probably landed there for a number of reasons. Number one is that for several days after she disappeared, people over their shortwave radios heard her calling for help. So
Mm.
they know that they landed somewhere, you know, they were somewhere out there. So they landed, we know that they're on Nicomaroro, have been found a shoe of the brand and the size that she wore. Don't know if it was the same style, but it was the right brand and size. There was freckle cream, and she was known to be worried about the freckles on her face. There was a jar of freckle cream. There were some things like combs that had been made out of sheet metal, the same kind of metal that was in the plane she was flying. There were shellfish, and the people in that part of the world, you know how Americans open shellfish using the hinge? But the native people in that part of the world break the hinge and open it the other way. But there were shellfish that had been pried open, the style Westerners do. They found also skeletal remains that were taken to a lab in London and were measured, and a report was written up saying that it was a man. Could have been Fred Noonan. She had a navigator with her who was a man. But the bones have disappeared, and nobody knows where they are now, whether they got thrown away or whether they're in a box somewhere, nobody knows. But scientists have recently looked at the measurements of those bones and actually think maybe it wasn't a man. They think that the measurements kind of fit what her stature was, her height and all that kind of thing. So it could have been her bones. A couple of years ago, there was a photograph that turned up at Nicomaroro where there was something out in the water, and you can't really tell what it is. It's just this blob. But the thought is maybe the plane got washed back out onto the reef and it's upside down, and that's the landing gear sticking up.
Mm.
What was the other thing? Oh, I can't remember. There's one other thing. So there's a lot of evidence that says that probably they landed on Nicomaroro and just never got rescued. But nobody knows that for sure. So they're still trying to find the plane so that they can know for sure. All right, Ladybug again.
Let me unmute her. Unmute yourself, Liberty.
I keep forgetting, but what's her name?
My name or her name? She's Amelia Earhart, and I'm Darcy Tucker. Amelia Earhart. Any other questions? Anything else you want to know? Anything you want to tell me?
I'm just putting notes.
Good. Good, good. All right, so who among you wants to be a pilot? Anyone going to learn how to fly? No.
Oh, nobody.
That was one of the things that she really wanted, was women to learn how to fly. When she was flying, there were only 99 women in the world who were licensed to fly. Only 99 in the world. And one of the things that she kept saying was, women need to start flying. Women need to push at the boundaries. Women need to do all the things that men are doing so that we can prove that we can do it. Because we're just as capable. We're just as capable, but we've got to prove it. And she did really feel like women needed to be able to wear pants. Girls should be able to wear pants so that they could move more easily and do athletic things. And she kept a scrapbook of all the impressive women that she'd heard about who were in politics and doctors and all that, because when she was around, people thought women should stay home and not get involved in those kinds of things. So we look at her and say, oh yeah, she's a woman, she's a pilot, big deal, because there are a lot of them. There are female astronauts. But in her day, he was doing something really, really amazing. So, Carter, that's quite a tongue you have there. All right, my friends. Any other questions for me? Anything you want to know before I sign off?
I will just say thank you so much for coming and talking to us today and I loved it. I thought it was wonderful.
Thank you.
And thanks to Amelia Earhart as well.
I'll pass on the word to her.
All right. Okay.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much.